met her in the fall. He took her to a movie, and when they done it all, he took her.
Hello and welcome to the Fabulous Picture Show. I'm Amanda Palmer. This week we're joined by Lucy Bailey, co-director of an emotional and chilling new documentary about Zimbabwe. It's called Mugabe and the White African.
But so did I.
It's about a family under siege
I want you out.
who decide to take on a dictator.
We're still going to go against Mugabe.
And filmmaker Lucy Bailey explains why.
They weren't putting self-preservation above everything else. They're doing it on behalf of everyone in Zimbabwe.
Also on the show, his last film was one of Brazil's biggest hits ever. So what did José Padilha do next?
My idea was to show what hunger means individually for those who face it.
But first, when director Martin Scorsese made his first ever trip to the Middle East, he wasn't there to promote his new film. Oh no, he came to Doha, Qatar, bearing a special gift. Made 40 years ago, Shari Abdel Salam's The Mummy, or The Night of Counting the Years, remains a landmark of Egyptian cinema. Set in the 19th century, it's about an Egyptian family that plunders ancient tombs. But the film itself had become badly deteriorated until Martin Scorsese's World Cinema Foundation stepped in and restored it to its original glory. Even recently, The Mummy was voted as perhaps the most iconic Egyptian film of all time.
It's a beauty.
When did you first see it?
It took me till 1976.
7 years after it was
7 years
released.
after, maybe, yeah, to get a 16mm print, which was pink, completely pink. And it was just, it was really extraordinary. And then we were able to get some old videotape of it, which was even worse. And that's all I have seen. That's all I've seen over the years. So when we had the chance, immediately, let's do it. Let's do it. Because it says so much about what who does the culture belong to?
The screening of The Mummy at the Doha Tribeca Film Festival was held outdoors at Souk Waqif and open to the public. You've been bringing audiences together for a very long time as a filmmaker. What was it like for you to see that?
Well, for me, it's like a dream, because the idea is not only bringing audiences together, but a varied audience to experience something communally on a big screen, particularly projected outside. It takes entertainment back to the original roots of the storyteller outside, talking to people, describing, telling a story.
For many, many years as a filmmaker, you've been part of a generation of filmmakers who are very aware of the need for restoration and preservation. But you particularly have put an enormous amount of energy and time into that. What spawned that?
Cinema itself, the American, British, Italian cinema I saw growing up, it kind of saved me in a way. It nourished something spiritual in me. Narratively, too, the storytelling itself. This is something that was my lifeblood in a way. It kept me going. I can see a film 20 times, a film like Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, British film. I've seen it over 10, 12 times now over the years in its final form, but each time the film gets richer and deeper, maybe because I'm getting a little older, you see. It's a different film each time.
Anything wrong?
Murdoch, the war is over.
So I wanted to preserve that. Now, how can you preserve something which is so ephemeral?
The World Cinema Foundation is an extension of Scorsese's long-term efforts to preserve American studio films.
At a certain point, he started to realize that cinema from the rest of the world was, you know, in just as great need as American cinema, if not greater, because, you know, there weren't all these titles under one umbrella or a series of big umbrellas, you know. And so we started the World Cinema Foundation. He started it in 2007 with the idea that the accent would be on developing countries.
When I first got involved with foreign films, I always tell the story of having seen Patya Panchali subject race film on television in New York, 1959. Interestingly enough, this is a film about the people, seemingly made by the people, who are usually in the background of the other films that I've seen in India. Usually films made by the Americans, English, and the French, and they're always in the background, they're always subsidiary characters.
And this year particularly, I've seen 5 fantastic films out of the Arab world, which are not being made just for the Arab audiences, which have enormous crossover potential.
That's the key, the crossover potential, yeah. It's important that younger people especially begin to see films from Africa, films from the Middle East and everything, about marriages, about relationships between people, and there's no color line, there's no cultural line, you see. And we begin to see it all together as one.
Thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
Really a pleasure. His 2 last films, one of the most admired documentaries of the decade, and then there was the top prize winner at Berlin Film Festival. So how does José Padilha cash in? Well, it's not how you would expect.
Garapa is the sugar water fed to the poorest of the poor in Brazil. It's also the name of a gritty new documentary by José Padilha, one of Brazil's most acclaimed filmmakers.
The cheapest way to buy energy is to buy foods with a lot of calorie in it, like sugar, for instance. My aim was to try to show the problem of hunger from a very intimate perspective. Instead of giving the statistics of hunger, which we already know what they are, and trying to analyze the causes of hunger, my idea was to show what hunger means individually for those who face it. How hunger affects a family. How does a family react to the fact that they won't have food and they know it?
Que vem que eles desnutridos, aí vem com esse pacotinho. Aí, às vezes, muitas vezes a gente vai dar uma viagem assim. Às vezes de racelões, a gente dá uma viagem perdida, sem ter nada, porque não tem vindo do choró.
Basically, 1 out of 7 human beings face hunger, and they are insecure about whether they're going to have food tomorrow. Nowadays, it's 920 million people, according to the United Nations, face conditions similar to those shown in Garapa.
Podia falar a verdade, que teu marido paga tuas coisas. E leva, ele tira para beber de cachaça, às vezes as coisas eu guardo, não deve.
The lo-fi aesthetic recalls such landmark documentaries as Luis Buñuel's Land Without Bread, about poverty in rural Spain in the 1930s. Buñuel was limited by 30s technology, but with Garapa, the raw, grainy images are purely intentional.
You know, the idea of this movie was to take everything that is not essential to filmmaking out of the movie. In the same way that the families I'm shooting only have the very basic things that's needed for someone to survive. So I took away color. I only used the direct sound. I didn't use any sound effects, any post-production sound. It's only the direct sound. So, you know, all of this is a part of a general aesthetical decision to make a raw film.
It's a striking contrast to Padilha's previous work, including Elite Squad.
Você não viu? Você viu! Você viu! Quem matou? Pode falar!
His look at drug criminals and abusive cops in the favelas. And Bus 174, about a notorious bus hijacking that was broadcast live on TV. The documentary explores the social injustice behind the desperate action. In 1993, outside the Candelaria church in Rio, police massacred 8 homeless children while they slept. The hijacker was one of the traumatized survivors.
The biggest thing that explains how society operates is the difference between those who have and those who have not. Those who have not, poor people, don't have access to power, don't have access to the media. They cannot, you know, get a representation to the Congress. And at the end of the day, you know, that's why you don't have a World Summit to deal with hunger problem, and you have a World Summit to deal with bank problems.
Só para dar gostinho, mexe, viu? Mexe. Senta aqui, né?
In part 2, we're screening the documentary Mugabe and the White African. I have the co-director here, Lucy Bailey. This is a great story. It's about one man. This is Mike Campbell, who takes on
President Robert Mugabe in an international court for human rights abuses and racial discrimination over the land reform program in Zimbabwe.
He's 74 years old. He is as strong as an ox. Anyway, it's an incredible story. It brings a lot of questions besides the issue of Mugabe's regime and land redistribution, but we'll find out more about those questions in part 2. See you then.
He met her in the fall.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Fabulous Picture Show and this special screening of Mugabe and the White African. Can I please introduce the co-director, Lucy Bailey. She's as tough as they come. She goes into Zimbabwe at a time when Mugabe basically said no foreign journalists. There was a total ban.
Yeah, it was a real challenge. I mean, the logistics were incredible. We had to smuggle ourselves, our equipment into the country. We had to go over a different border every time. We had to come up with cover stories. It was tough. It was really tough and really dangerous to be in public or be anywhere with the camera. So actually, you know, to be able to make the film at all was pretty extraordinary.
It's totally riveting. Enjoy the film. See you then.
They just broke into the house and I said, "This is mine."
As Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe attempts to complete his forced takeover of white-owned farms,
there was about 10 of them. They came and they sat all over the place there and telling us, hurry up, I want your stuff out of here tonight, get out.
75-year-old Mike Campbell refuses to give up.
We've got to fight back. You know, you've got to do something, otherwise you just lie on your back and call it a day.
Filmed in secret, under perilous conditions, Mugabe and the White African, directed by Lucy Bailey and Andrew Thompson, is the story of a farmer who took one of the world's most brutal dictators to an international tribunal, charging him with racial discrimination and human rights violations.
People who oppose him go to prison. They get beaten, they disappear.
In a last-ditch effort to hold on to the family farm.
I wouldn't like my grandchildren to one day in the future say, you know, my grandfather had a farm in Africa, but a few guys came along and said boo to him, and he packed his bags and ran away.
Mugabe took power in 1980 when Zimbabwe won its independence from Britain. He claims that his land reform program redresses colonial injustices.
We cannot continue to exist here, to live as if we are an extension of the British Empire.
But the controversial policy has taken a heavy toll on the country and its people.
The demise of the economy, the lack of basic necessities, the degeneration of the infrastructure, it's all as a result of the land invasions.
Though Campbell and his family face continual intimidation,
I will sleep here until you are out, and I mean it. I want you out.
he and his son-in-law, Ben Freeth, staunchly pursue their long-running court case.
We want justice now, you know. Every day that goes by, there's more people who are being kicked off their farms, and we can't have that.
But can Mugabe be brought to justice?
I can't believe that they're postponing us. They're just buying time, man. It's just a stitch-up.
Mugabe and the White African portrays the collapse of an entire nation through the tribulations of one white family struggling to remain in a homeland that Mugabe says doesn't want them.
Our present state of mind is that you are now our enemies.
Mike Campbell was one of those farmers who bought that land legitimately, legally, under Mugabe. He wasn't somebody who inherited that land through earlier land grabbing and colonialism.
Absolutely. Mike didn't steal his farm. Mike worked very hard. At independence, the farm was offered to the Zimbabwe government for the purposes of land redistribution, but they didn't want it.
I think it was love at first sight. We came back saying, yeah, this is the farm, we must buy this farm. I had to get a loan from the land bank. A loan which, I might add, took me 20 years to repay. Almost to the year after repaying and getting the title deeds, the government said, we'll have that, thank you very much.
From what my understanding was, in the 1930s, it was basically a white minority government. And at that point, 70% of the land was pretty much owned by white farmers. So there was a huge inequity for a long time.
That's true. There was an imbalance, and I mean, even today, certainly Mike and the other farmers in Zimbabwe know desperately that land reform needs to happen in Zimbabwe, absolutely. But of course, it has to happen legally, and it has to happen in a way that the land is given to farmers who know how to farm and, you know, can farm the land. And clearly, as you see in the film, that isn't happening at the moment.
Not one of them could be typified as a trained farmer or a potentially good farmer. ZANU minister, next one, provincial administrator's wife, next one, ZANU PF election agent, next one, High Court judge, High Court judge, High Court judge.
In the film, you show, my goodness, the cronyism, that Mugabe's cronies basically have inherited a lot of these land.
What are you doing here?
I'm here for my land.
This is my home, Mr.
It is your home. Well, you're in the wrong home. The land belongs to the black peasants.
Minister Shamir, a black peasant.
He's a minister like any other black peasant that deserves land.
A lot of people are tying the terrible famine in Zimbabwe right now to the fact that farmers are not being given this land.
I mean, that's the sad thing, is that, you know, some of you will know, Zimbabwe was the breadbasket of Africa, and now it's a food-dependent nation, and that's because the farms aren't being farmed. You know, they're stripped of assets, they're stripped of anything that can be taken away, and then the land is just left in ruin.
We don't want you anymore. Get it right? We don't.
But we are Zimbabweans.
We don't care whether you're Indian, Malawi, Karanga, whatnot. We just don't want you in particular, yourself.
Just because we're white, eh?
Anyway, I'm not talking to you anymore.
My name is Eldridge Calverwell. I'm a Zimbabwe activist. I'm a African, and I'm a mixed-race African, but even in Africa, I'm not recognized as an African as such. And I find that is derogatory.
As a Zimbabwean?
Yes, I'm recognized as a Zimbabwean, but I'm not recognized as how Mugabe would say, a black Zimbabwean. And he stated constantly that if you're not black Zimbabwean, you're not Zimbabwean.
And that's a real shame, and I think that's challenging in itself, and that's partly why we titled the film The White African, because that in itself is kind of a thought-provoking concept, you know.
Is it possible to be a white man and an Australian? And of course the answer is yes. But is it possible to be a white man and an African? If you talk to Mugabe, the answer is very strongly no.
Mugabe and his people, they've always said that commercial farmers, white commercial farmers in particular, have been mistreating farm workers. What was your experience during filming? Did you get time to interview some farm workers?
Well, I hope you see in the film that the relationship is a fantastic one. I think actually also on the other farm you see where they are moved off. Again, the distraught faces of the farm workers there.
His father worked for my grandfather. He was his right-hand man. He was his cattleman. And he looked after the cattle. He dipped them. He took care of them. It's his whole life. He was born here. Belinda was born here, his niece. And they have fought to stay here.
What was a real shame for us is not actually be able to get more interview with the farm workers. And that is purely the climate of fear in Zimbabwe. Anyone who speaks out on camera is putting their lives at risk. It was slightly different for Ben and Mike and the family because their head was above the parapet because of the court case, and they wanted that story to be out there. But actually for the workers, it was even more dangerous.
Yeah, the guys are pretty uneasy this morning. In last night's raid, they singled out one of the chief guards.
Someone came to my house asking for me. Then I saw there is many people holding weapons, iron bars, catapults, and to catch me, start beating me.
I should imagine in that situation the levels of fear must be overwhelming. Were you scared a lot?
Yeah, I mean, it's scary. I mean, we had to be very careful about when we were there and when we were not there, but we couldn't be too scared because they weren't too scared. And if they were brave enough to carry on, then we had to be brave enough to go. And there were many times when I thought, we can't carry on, we cannot do this, you know.
There's 2 guys here. 3 guys. Oh, there's quite a few there.
Picking up stones. Okay, let's get back.
Drive!
Keep going.
Fine, man. Okay, my window's open.
My co-director Andrew filmed in the hospital soon after they got beaten up, and even that, to get in the hospital, there was ZANU militia on the door of the hospital, and the equipment had to be broken down into parts, wrapped as gift wrap, and smuggled in to the hospital. And Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to describe the climate of fear that it was made under, really.
One of the shocking things for me was their resolve, and that moment where Mike says, it strengthened our resolve, basically.
If you go against Mugabe, then they let all the stops out and try and get you. But I'm afraid that's not going to work too well, because we're still going to go against Mugabe.
They weren't putting self-preservation above everything else. If they were, of course, it would have been crazy to do what they did, but they're doing it on behalf of everyone in Zimbabwe.
The farm is our homes, it's the homes for our workers, it's our livelihood, it's everything. And if we lose it, we've lost our place on the soil in Africa.
What are you going to do next?
Well, take the film around politically, because our promise to Ben and Mike was that we would try and, that the film would hopefully make a difference, and we're all working hard towards that at the moment.
I must tell you all that this is Lucy's first feature film, and often a documentary, you can have a fantastic story and you found that in your hands and you developed that story and you kept with it with all your challenges, but it was a beautifully made documentary as well. I think that is a real testament to your skills, so congratulations on that, and really,
We've just seen so much hatred being foisted on the nation, and it just is such a destructive thing, and we need to love each other and give each other a chance to go forward in a positive and constructive way.
Well, that's it for this fabulous picture show. Now, you can help Lucy Bailey get her film shown around the world as it deserves to be seen. If you
just please, call your local cinema and just say we want to see this film, and hopefully we can get it out there and as many people as possible can see it.
I love the idea of everyone harassing cinemas. I don't know if I'm supposed to endorse this, but I will say you must see the film. Tell your friends. It's always the best type of thing to do for independent filmmakers. Anyhow, I'll see you on the next Fabulous Picture Show. Join me then. See you then.
I will never surrender. Zimbabwe is mine.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the film?
A mega 10, because it was so inspiring, it was so captivating, it was so soul-searching.
For me, as a Zimbabwean living abroad, I think it was very educational.
If it came out as a Hollywood film, you'd say, "Oh, God, that's ridiculous. That couldn't happen. It's too far-fetched."
I was particularly, impressed by the spirit that they showed the campers.